sat at a wrong table on blind date by mistake, unaware he's a mafia boss who changed her life. Hi, my beautiful family. I speak to you today with a heart full of love, but also with truth. Our channel is built on your strength, your love, and your support. Every story I write is written with tears, with passion, and with prayer for each one of you. But my family, I see the channel going down because many forget to like, many forget to comment. It hurts me because it feels like my hard work is left unseen. I ask you today, not just as a creator, but as your brother who truly loves you. Please, whenever you watch, give your love back. A simple like, a simple comment keeps this family alive, keeps our light shining, and gives me the power to bring you more and more beautiful stories. May God bless every woman in this family with honor, with dignity, and with unshakable strength. May every man be blessed with wisdom and respect. May our children rise higher than mountains, and may every home be filled with endless love and peace. Amen. If your heart is true, write present. If your love is real, write in the comment where you're watching from. They say one wrong move can change everything. For me, it wasn't a fight, or a secret, or even a betrayal. It was something so ordinary, so laughably human, sitting down at the wrong table. A crowded restaurant, dim lighting, too much perfume in the air, and my nerves buzzing from a blind date I never wanted. That's all it took to twist my life into something out of a crime novel taught at first. It felt harmless. I spotted a man waiting alone. Dark suit, perfect posture, the kind of confidence that didn't just fill a room, it bent it around him. I thought he was my date. And why wouldn't I? I wasn't expecting a mafia boss. Who would? But let me back up. This wasn't just about a bad date. This was about betrayal, humiliation, and a revenge plot that would burn hotter than the candles flickering on that table. Because the man I was supposed to meet, he didn't just show up late. He showed up with an agenda. And trust me, it wasn't romance. Now picture this. Me, already flustered, trying to keep a polite smile while realizing something felt off. The waitstaff kept glancing over their shoulders. Two men in dark coats lingered near the bar, not drinking, not talking. And the man across from me, he barely spoke, but when he did, it was with a weight that made me forget how to breathe. Every word landed like a warning, like I'd just stepped into a conversation that was never meant for me, and then like a bad punchline my actual blind date barged in, loud, arrogant, the type of guy who treats servers like props and women like placeholders. He saw me sitting there across from a stranger, and instead of embarrassment, he smirked. He had planned to humiliate me in public, on purpose. That should have been the worst of it. The kind of story you cry laugh about with friends later. But instead, it became the opening move in a much bigger game. Because the man I accidentally sat across from, he wasn't just anybody. He was power. He was danger. And whether I liked it or not, he was watching what started as an awkward blind date turned into a front row seat to betrayal, lies, and a revenge plot worthy of the Mafia itself. My humiliation wasn't just mine anymore, it was something he could use. Something we could use. And that's when I realized, sometimes revenge doesn't come from where you expect it. Sometimes it wears a tailored suit, sips expensive wine, and looks you dead in the eye as if to say, don't worry, I'll handle this. If you love stories where karma wears a tailored suit and revenge comes with a glass of fine wine, hit that subscribe button. These videos take hours of digging, writing, and reliving second-hand drama. Your support makes all the difference. Now, let's rewind to that night, to the wrong table, and to the mistake that changed everything. They always say first impressions matter. But that night, my first impression was a disaster waiting to happen. I remember standing outside the restaurant, staring at the golden glow spilling through its glass doors. My stomach twisted with that familiar cocktail of dread and forced optimism. Blind dates had never gone well for me. Too many awkward silences, Too many men who treated it like a job interview. And honestly, I was already rehearsing excuses to leave early. Sorry, early meeting tomorrow. Or maybe, oh no, I think my cat's sick. Pathetic, but safe. Still, I walked in. The place was stunning. Low chandeliers, white tablecloths, candles flickering like tiny spotlights on every table. And me, I was just trying not to trip over my own heels. That's when I saw him, alone at a corner table, glass of red wine in hand, posture impossibly straight. He wasn't scrolling on his phone or checking the door every 5 seconds like a nervous date. He was still composed, like he owned the room, or maybe the entire block around it. I thought, that has to be him. So I walked over, heart pounding, palms sweaty, rehearsing a smile I hoped looked effortless. Hi, you must be Daniel, right? He didn't answer immediately, just looked at me with these dark, unreadable eyes. A pause long enough for my skin to prickle. Then finally, he said, "Sit, not please. Not, of course. Just sit." And I did, because something in his voice made me forget how to say no up close. He was even more intimidating. Perfectly tailored suit, watch that probably cost more than my rent, a faint scar at his jawline that only made him look sharper. His presence wasn't loud, but it pressed against me, heavy, undeniable. I tried to laugh it off. Blind dates are always a little awkward, huh? My voice cracked at the end, betraying me. He didn't smile. Instead, his gaze flicked past me to the bar, to the waitstaff, to the two men in dark suits standing by the wall. They weren't eating. They weren't drinking. They were watching. That's when the knot in my stomach tightened. Something about this wasn't right. Still, I told myself I was overthinking. Maybe he was just important. Some CEO, maybe. Rich people always have weird habits, don't they? I pushed down my nerves and tried again. So, Daniel? I'm not Daniel. His tone was flat, almost bored. The words hit me like ice water. I blinked, heat rising in my face. Oh, I'm so sorry. I thought. My voice trailed off. Another long silence. He studied me the way you'd study a puzzle piece that doesn't quite fit. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, he smiled. Not warm, not kind. More like he was amused by a private joke. The waiter arrived just then, and that's when it clicked. The way he bent slightly too low, his hands trembling as he set down another glass of wine. The way his eyes darted between us like he was terrified of making a mistake. This wasn't a date. This was a power dynamic, one I had no business being a part of, but I was already into deep. Wine? The man Adrian, I'd later learn, asked, sliding the glass toward me. His voice softened just a fraction, but it carried weight, like every syllable was a test. My throat was dry, but I nodded. Sure. I lifted the glass, trying not to shake, and wondered if I'd just stumbled into the strangest, most dangerous mistake of my life. And I wasn't wrong, because in that moment, while I was still fumbling through my confusion, the doors behind me opened, and the real Daniel, my actual blind date, walked in. But we'll get to him later. For now, all you need to know is this. I sat down at the wrong table, and that one choice would unravel everything I thought I knew about safety, betrayal, and revenge. What's the most awkward first date experience you've ever had? Share it below. I was just beginning to convince myself I could survive the awkwardness of this wrong table encounter when the doors to the restaurant opened with a burst of cold air. And in walked Daniel, my actual blind date. You know the type. Loud before he even reaches the table. Phone still in hand. Suit too shiny, cologne cloud arriving 10 seconds ahead of him. I didn't even need the name confirmation. His energy screamed, "Look at me." Emily. His voice cut through the soft murmur of the restaurant, sharp and careless. Heads turned. Mine ducked. I froze, still seated across from Adrian, the stranger who radiated power like a second skin. I managed a weak wave. Hi. Over here, Daniel strode over, scanning the table, his brow furrowing when he noticed Adrian. Ah, who's this? His laugh was thin, mocking. Wow, couldn't even wait for me to show up, huh? Already found someone better? My cheeks burned. I opened my mouth to explain, but Adrian didn't move. He didn't defend me. Didn't leave, he just watched. Silent. Unreadable. I thought you were late, I stammered. I sat down at the wrong table by mistake. This is Daniel cut me off with a smirk. Figures. You never really were good at picking, were you? His tone was casual, but the words landed like a slap. The waiter hesitated nearby, holding menus caught in the storm. Daniel snatched one without looking, tossed it onto the table. Guess I'll let you finish playing pretend with whoever this is. He gestured toward Adrian, dismissive, like a man waving off a valet, and still Adrian said nothing. Just leaned back, wineglass in hand, gaze locked on Daniel like he was dissecting him piece by piece. I wished the ground would swallow me whole. My voice cracked. Daniel, can you not? But he wasn't finished. He leaned closer, his words sharp enough for nearby tables to hear. Honestly, Emily, what did you expect? My buddy set this up as a favor. He said you were sweet, quiet. I figured I'd take you out, have a laugh, maybe. But let's be real, this. He motioned at me, at my thrift store dress I tried so hard to make elegant. Not exactly what I had in mind. A few diners glanced over, pity flickering in their eyes. That was worse than the insult itself. Inside me, humiliation curdled into something heavier. Betrayal. Because in that moment, it hit me, he never came here looking for a connection. He came for a stage, for an audience. And I was his punchline. My hands trembled under the table. I forced a brittle laugh, hoping to diffuse the tension. Wow, charming. Is this your idea of small talk? He leaned back, grinning. What? I'm just being honest. Better than stringing you along, Adrian finally spoke then, his voice low, deliberate. You should be careful where you aim your insults. The shift in Daniel's posture was instant. He turned, ready to bark back, but the words faltered on his tongue. Because Adrian wasn't smiling. He wasn't bluffing. His eyes cold, steady with the kind of eyes that promised consequences. For the first time, Daniel looked uneasy. Just for a second. Then he scoffed, covering his nerves with bravado. Relax, man. Just having fun. Fun, Adrian repeated, sipping his wine. The single word held more weight than Daniel's entire performance. I sat there, torn between wanting to vanish and wanting to scream. My humiliation burned hot, but beneath it, a flicker of something else. Recognition. This wasn't just a bad date. It was a deliberate game. Daniel had set me up to be laughed at, to boost his fragile ego at my expense. And Adrian, this stranger, this silent storm across from me, wasn't just watching. He was calculating. Daniel clapped his hands once, as if to reset the mood. All right, whatever. Let's eat. Emily, why don't you order for us? You look like you've been here before. Another smirk. Another jab. I looked down at the menu, words blurring through the sting in my eyes. My voice was barely steady. Maybe I should just go. But Adrian's gaze caught mine, then steady, grounding. It wasn't pity, it was something sharper. A quiet assurance that I wasn't as invisible as Daniel wanted me to feel. And that look, more than anything else, told me the night wasn't over. Not by a long shot, because humiliation, when witnessed by the wrong kind of man, has a way of turning into fuel. Would you walk out mid-date if someone disrespected you like that? Or stick it out? The silence that followed Daniel's last insult was suffocating. Forks clinked softly in the distance. A cough here, a laugh there, but at our table, the world had narrowed to 3 people. Me, wishing I could disappear. Daniel, still smirking like a child who thought he'd won. And Adrian, watching. Then, without warning, Adrian stood. The chair scraped against the floor, sharp and deliberate. He placed his napkin neatly on the table, then turned to me. You don't need to stay here, Daniel scoffed. Oh, come on. She's fine. We're just having fun. Adrian's gaze cut across the table. Daniel's words strangled in his throat. It was almost eerie, how quickly bravado drained from his face. Adrian didn't look back at him. His attention was fixed on me, steady, unflinching. Finish your wine, he said softly. Then I'll take you home. Every rational part of me screamed no. I didn't know this man. I'd barely spoken to him. He could have been anyone, a seer, a criminal, a psychopath. And yet, in that moment, his offer felt like the only lifeline in a room full of sharks. Daniel tried again, voice brittle. Seriously, Emily, you don't even know this guy. I turned to Daniel, my humiliation simmering into something sharper. You're right. I don't. My voice was steadier than I felt. But I know you. And that's the problem. For once, Daniel had nothing to say. I stood, gathering my coat with trembling hands. Adrian stepped forward, pulling out the chair with the kind of old-world courtesy you only see in movies. The contrast between him and Daniel was stark. One stripped me down to nothing. The other handed me dignity like it was second nature. We walked out together. Outside, the night air hit my skin like cold water. Adrian's driver was already waiting, sleek black car idling at the curb, headlights glowing faintly in the dark. Of course he had a driver. He opened the door for me himself. After you. I hesitated, clutching my coat tighter. Look, I appreciate what you did in there, but I can grab a cab. His eyes flicked toward me, sharp but unreadable. A cab won't give you what you deserve. The words unsettled me. They sounded less like kindness, more like a vow. Still, I slid into the car. Because deep down, I wanted to see where this went. Inside, the leather seats were cold, the air faintly scented with cedar. Adrian joined me, and for a moment, silence filled the space between us. Finally, I blurted out, So, who are you exactly? A small smile ghosted across his lips. Someone who doesn't like wasted potential. That's not an answer, I said, trying for brave, but hearing the tremor in my own voice. No, he agreed. It isn't. The car rolled forward, city lights streaming across his face in fragments, bright 1 second, shadowed the next. I caught a glimpse of that faint scar at his jawline again, and the weight he carried so effortlessly. Confidence, danger, authority. I should have been terrified, and I was. But beneath the fear was something else. Curiosity. Why did you step in? I asked. Adrian didn't look at me when he replied. Because men like him mistake cruelty for strength. It's a habit that needs correction. The way he said it. Calm, factual. Like it was his responsibility to correct the world itself. I swallowed. You talk like you've done this before. He finally turned, his eyes locking onto mine. And in that quiet, moving car, I realized just how much danger I was sitting in. Not the reckless, chaotic kind. No, this was precise, controlled, the kind of danger that writes its own rules. I wanted to ask more. I wanted to know everything, but my pulse was already racing. My voice too shaky. So instead, I looked out the window, watching the city blur past, and that's when it hit me. This wasn't just a ride home. This wasn't just one bad date gone wrong. That was the night I realized. I hadn't just sat at the wrong table. I'd stepped into an entirely different world. If someone mysterious defended you like this, would you be intrigued or terrified? I should have just gone home that night, curled up in bed, and sworn of dating apps forever. That would have been the same thing to do. But sanity has never been my strong suit. Instead, I found myself answering Adrian's call 3 days later. His voice on the phone had been calm, low, persuasive. Dinner, public place, no pressure. Like he knew I'd say yes eventually, and I did. The restaurant wasn't the cozy bistro I imagined. It was marble floors, hushed voices, and men in sharp suits who definitely weren't waiters. Everyone moved like they had earpieces in even when they didn't. That was the first time it clicked. Adrian wasn't just rich. He wasn't just powerful. He was something else. At the head of the room, Adrian sat like a king at court. Every glance from the staff, every deferential nod, it all orbited around him. And me, I felt like a trespasser who'd wandered past the velvet rope. I leaned in across the table, whispering, "Okay." "Who are you?" He smirked, swirling his glass. "I told you. Someone who doesn't like wasted potential." "Yeah, but you didn't tell me the part where people look like they take a bullet for you." He didn't deny it. Just sipped his drink, calm as ever. That was when the story started creeping in. Whispers I overheard. A staff member who wouldn't meet my eyes. A headline I recognized from months ago about a businessman under investigation. It wasn't paranoia. It was revelation. Adrian wasn't just wealthy. He was Mafia wealthy. The kind of man who could snap his fingers and make someone vanish or shower you with so much protection it felt suffocating. And I panicked. I didn't answer his calls. I stopped replying to his texts. I even changed my route home, convinced black SUVs were trailing me. Maybe they were. But the thing about Adrian, he didn't chase. He waited. And somehow, that was worse. Because circumstances had a funny way of dragging me back. One night, after a late shift, I walked into my apartment to find my lock broken. My living room ransacked. Not random burglary, it was too precise. My jewelry untouched, but my laptop gone. My phone charger missing. Documents rifled through, and waiting by my door, like he knew it would happen, was Adrian. "They're watching you now," he said simply. I remember snapping. "Who is watching me?" He didn't flinch. "The same people watching me. The same people your charming date is connected to." My stomach dropped. "Daniel?" Adrian nodded once. "He's not who you think." He was bait. Your humiliation wasn't random, it was a message. It was surreal. Hearing that the worst date of my life had been orchestrated, that my embarrassment had been a chess move in someone else's game. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was too much. "You're telling me my blind date was working for your enemies?" Adrian leaned against the doorframe, expression unreadable. "Not working, feeding them. And now they think you're useful." The room spun. I felt sick. "I'm not useful. I'm a nobody." His eyes hardened. "Not to them. To them, you're leverage." That was when I noticed the shift in his tone. Protective, but edged with something darker. He wasn't asking me to believe him, he was warning me. Over the next week, I pieced together more than I wanted to know. A whispered phone call I overheard in his office. A coded phrase muttered by one of his men. And one night, a conversation I wasn't meant to hear. "There's a leak," one of his lieutenants said. "Someone close." Adrian's reply was low, lethal. "Find him before he finds us." That was when the betrayal inside his circle came into focus. Someone was feeding information to his enemies. Someone who knew names, places, movements, and somehow I was tangled in it. Every instinct told me to run, to pack a bag and disappear. But then I remembered the broken lock, the missing laptop, the way Adrian had appeared at my door before I even called the police. Running wasn't an option. Not anymore. One night, I finally confronted him. Why me? Why not just cut me loose and let me go back to my boring little life? Adrian studied me for a long moment, then said quietly, "Because boring little lives don't survive this world once they're touched by it." I hated that he was right. I hated that part of me believed him. But what scared me most was that another part of me didn't want to walk away. Because behind the danger, the power, the shadowed reputation, there was also Adrian. The man who pulled up my chair when I was humiliated. The man who saw through cruelty like it was glass. The man who, for reasons I couldn't yet understand, seemed to see me. And that was the moment I realized. I wasn't just caught in his orbit. I was becoming part of his story, whether I liked it or not. "Do you think you could handle dating someone with dangerous secrets?" I thought the worst part of that night, the blind date from hell, was the embarrassment. The way Daniel had smirked when he walked in. Like my humiliation was a joke he'd been rehearsing all week. But it turned out the joke wasn't just on me. It was a move. A calculated strike in a game I didn't even know I was playing. The truth hit me weeks later, in the quietest of ways. I was in Adrian's study, pretending not to sleep while he handled a phone call in another room. On his desk was a folder, ordinary, almost boring, until I saw my name on the tab. I shouldn't have opened it. I knew that, but curiosity has always been my curse. Inside were photos. Me at the restaurant that night. Me walking home. Me with Daniel. Notes scrawled in the margins in a language I didn't recognize, except for one phrase circled twice. Rival family. My pulse kicked. Daniel hadn't just been arrogant. He hadn't just been cruel. He was connected to Adrian's enemies. I slammed the folder shut just as Adrian returned. His eyes flicked to the desk. For a moment, I thought he'd call me out. But instead, he poured himself a drink and said quietly, "So now you see." I hated how calm he sounded. Like my whole life being ripped apart was just inevitable. I whispered. He was working with them, wasn't he? Adrian finally met my eyes. He wasn't working. He was bait. They used you to test me, to see how I'd react, and suddenly, the humiliation made sense. The public mockery, the smirk. It wasn't about a bad date, it was about branding me as weak, vulnerable. A message to Adrian. This is what your world looks like when we touch it. I felt sick. My cheeks burned with the memory. What I thought was just personal embarrassment was actually a chessboard move in a war I hadn't signed up for. I wanted to scream at Adrian, to demand why he hadn't warned me, why he let me sit there, blindsided, thinking it was just my dignity on the line. But instead, all I could manage was, "So, what does that make me? A pawn?" He didn't answer right away, just set his glass down, leaned forward, and said, "It makes you a target." My stomach dropped. A target. I left that night shaking. Every sound outside my apartment felt like a threat. Every stranger's stare lingered too long. I was paranoid, jumpy, and angry at Daniel, at Adrian, at myself. And then came the message. A simple envelope slipped under my door. No return address. No handwriting. Just a single card with 4 words. "You don't belong here." That was when the last piece clicked into place. They weren't just testing Adrian. They were marking me, letting me know I was fair game. The humiliation hadn't been random cruelty. It was an initiation of sorts. A declaration. I wasn't outside their world anymore. I was in it, and I had a choice to make. Cut ties. Walk away. Pretend none of this ever touched me. Or face it. Stay. Learn. Fight. I won't lie, I thought about running. About vanishing into some new city. Some new job. Some new version of myself. But deep down, I knew something that terrified me even more than staying. Running wouldn't erase the target on my back. So let me ask you, what would you do? Should Emily cut ties and run? Or face this storm head on? Vote in the poll on screen. And that, right there, was the night the story shifted. When my blind date wasn't just a disaster, it was a declaration of war. Running would have been the logical thing, the safe thing. But logic never won wars, and I was already in 1.so. Instead of packing a bag and disappearing, I started paying attention. Really paying attention. Not to the men with guns, or the shadows in alleyways, but to the silences, the slip-ups, the things people didn't say. See, being an outsider had its advantages. No one bothered to hide their disdain from me. I wasn't one of them, so the inner circle assumed I was harmless. Invisible. That made me dangerous. I began noticing patterns. A phone that rang too often. Meetings that shifted locations without warning. A conversation cut short whenever I walked into a room. Tiny breadcrumbs, but enough to follow. And then there was Luca, Adrian's so-called advisor. Polished smile, expensive watch. always just a little too quick to agree. He once accidentally left his briefcase open, paper spread neatly like bait, and maybe most people would have ignored it. But not me, not anymore. Inside was a receipt. Innocuous on the surface, just a catering invoice. But the date and address didn't match any of Adrian's events. I memorized the details, smiled politely, and walked away like I'd seen nothing. Later, I searched, and what I found made my blood run cold. That address belonged to a warehouse rented under a shell company linked to the rival family. Luca wasn't just sloppy. He was feeding information straight to the enemy. The next night, I told Adrian. I expected anger, maybe even disbelief, but he just stared at me silent, like he was seeing me for the first time. "You sure?" he asked, "as sure as you were when you let me sit at your table." I shot back. My voice didn't even shake. That earned me the smallest of smiles. Approval, maybe. Or recognition. Hard to tell with him. What mattered was this. My humiliation had been a trap, but now the trap had teeth. My discovery shifted the balance. Luca wasn't Adrian's weapon anymore, he was leverage. And I had been the one to place him squarely on the board. For the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't just a pawn. I was a player, and the move I'd made, it didn't need bullets. It didn't need blood. It just needed patience and precision, because sometimes the quietest move flips the entire game. Would you have done the same in Emily's shoes, played the game from the shadows, or walked away before things went too far? Life didn't snap back to normal after Luca's betrayal was exposed. Normal had been shattered the moment I sat down at Adrian's table. What came after wasn't a return, it was a rewrite. For the first time in years, I wasn't shrinking into the background. I wasn't apologizing for existing, or brushing of cruelty with a nervous laugh. In Adrian's world, my voice mattered. And more importantly, it was heard. It started small. Strategy meetings where I was allowed to sit quietly in the corner. Only, I didn't stay quiet. I asked questions, pointed out inconsistencies, caught details that others glossed over. At first, they dismissed me until they realized my observations weren't guesses. They were right. Adrian noticed. He always noticed. "You see what others miss," he said once, almost casually. But coming from him, it felt like a crown, and just like that, I stopped being a pawn. I wasn't the girl at the wrong table anymore. I was a partner, not that it was easy. His men looked at me with suspicion, sometimes even disdain. They saw me as soft, fragile, but humiliation had forged me sharper than any weapon. Every time they doubted me, it only fueled my resolve. And when revenge finally came, it wasn't the cinematic kind, no dramatic shootout, no blood-soaked finale. It was quieter, more elegant. The rival family found themselves cornered, not by brute force, but by information. Their schemes exposed, their alliances broken, their power dismantled piece by piece. I had a hand in that. Me, the woman who once couldn't even survive a blind date without being mocked. But here's the thing, it wasn't just revenge against Adrian's enemies. It was revenge against my own past, against every man who thought I was disposable, against every laugh at my expense, against every time I felt small. And the sweetest part, I didn't need to raise my voice or play their game. I rewrote it one night, after the dust had settled. Adrian and I sat across from each other in that same restaurant where it all began. The candles flickered. The staff hovered, still nervous, still reverent. Only this time, I wasn't shaking with nerves. "This isn't the life you imagined," he said, studying me with that unreadable calm. "No," I replied. "Steady, sure. It's better." And I meant it. Because sometimes the worst mistake the wrong table. The wrong man leads you exactly where you were meant to be. So tell me, do you believe in fate? Or do we make our own destinies one reckless choice at a time? Looking back, it's almost funny. I walked into that restaurant expecting an awkward blind date. maybe a free meal, and a story to make my friends laugh. Instead, I walked straight into a storm and came out unrecognizable. I wasn't the woman shrinking under cruel jokes anymore. I wasn't the easy target, the one who left quietly when marked. Somewhere between humiliation and revelation, I became someone who could hold her own in the most dangerous room and not flinch. The irony. It all started with a mistake. Sitting at the wrong table, smiling at the wrong man. What felt like the beginning of another bad night turned out to be the pivot point of my life. Proof that sometimes the messiest accidents carry the most unexpected beauty. And maybe that's the real takeaway. Power isn't always about fists or fury. Sometimes it's about standing tall where people expect you to fold. Sometimes it's about rewriting your place in the story, even if you were never supposed to be part of it. So, what do you think? Was it fate, or just a reckless mistake that changed everything? If you enjoyed this roller coaster of betrayal, danger, and redemption, hit like, drop your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe. These scripts take time, passion, and yes, a bit of emotional recovery from all the drama. Your support helps us keep sharing these wild stories.